Hello and welcome to the No One Asked You podcast. I'm reading The Wheel of Time for the first time and sharing the experience with you. This is One Good Turn, The Eye of the World, and today I'm covering Chapter 39. This was one doozy of a chapter. We get a triumph, so to speak. A procession, we see Logain. I almost said meet there, but technically no, we didn't. We just see him. We've got some interesting imagery right at the end of this chapter that I'm excited to hear other opinions on. I'll give my take when we get there, or interpretation, rather. Poor Matt, and the mystery of the beggar, and a little bit of a mystery about a cliffhanger. Literal cliffhanger? No, he wasn't on a cliff at the end there. Let's get straight into it, though, shall we? Rand is in his room looking down at the crowds. This is the day he's been looking forward to above all others, except the day that Egwene and Perrin arrive in the city. The way it was worded had me do a double take the first time I read it. Next to the day when Egwene and Perrin walked in, alive and laughing over what they had seen, this was the day he had been waiting for most. So I had to unpack that for a second before moving on. Rand asks Matt to come, rather if he's coming, and Matt glowers, he's still curled up in a ball, and says, "Take that Trolloc you're so friendly with." Ooh, the bite! Rand fortunately bites back. He doesn't just take it. He says, "Blood and ashes, Matt, he's not a Trolloc. You're just being stubborn stupid. How many times do you want to have this argument? Light, it's not as if you'd never heard of Ogier before. I never heard they looked like Trollocs." And he curls up even further, and Rand mutters, "Stubborn stupid." And he tries to coax Matt out. He's asking him, "How long do you plan on hiding up here?" This is the last chance they could go together, and he refuses. So at this point, just one page in, I'm asking myself two questions. One, what is this day? And the answer comes quick enough, both in the prose and in my expectation, which is that it's probably Logain Day, if I can call it that. But then that brings the next question, which is, how many days have passed since they arrived? And I don't think that question is answered in this chapter. It's certainly suggested they've been there at least one day. And I know that people have been crowding into the city, but I suppose I never really stopped to ask how long they had until Logain made it. And I guess I just didn't quite imagine that it would be the very next day. So the timeline here is in question for me, but I feel like I have to default to the next day. And then when you factor in whatever Bornhald's rush to get to Caemlyn was, I would have imagined it would be to see the dragon reborn, although I'm sure he's much too dignified to dash for that, to give any other explanation than it's his duty as a white cloak to see this dark friend perish, or something to that effect. The thing there is, though, I can't imagine that killing Perrin and Egwene would have made just one day's difference for the company to make it to Caemlyn in time to see Logain. So maybe Bornhald wasn't trying to make it in time to see Logain, but for some other reason. There's lots of speculation and factors I'm considering, is the point of this tangent with regard to how many days have passed since both events, Perrin and Egwene's escape and Rand's arrival in the city. Before it clicked in my mind, though, that this would be Logain Day, there's some prose about Master Gil having told Rand that there's a healer nearby. Apparently, healers are laying low for fear of being accused of being dark friends and having the dragon's fang painted on their door. And then it gets into Rand contemplating whatever it is that's wrong with Matt. And I'm glad that Rand is smart enough now to realize that there is something wrong with Matt. Again, I don't need him to jump to the dagger immediately, or at all for that matter for the time being, but it is enough for me to know that he is concerned and should be concerned and is contemplating what he can do about it. But he reckons that Matt's not really sick. He doesn't have a fever or anything like that. We get how paranoid Matt is. He won't eat anything that doesn't come directly from Rand, and he's refusing to leave the room. So things are getting pretty bad. Back to the timeline tangent, though, that they've been there long enough for Rand to be bringing him meals in the room repeatedly. I don't know if they're eating once a day, twice a day, or 3 times a day. My guess would be twice. I think this kind of suggests that some time has passed, at least. That said, on top of that, as I'm reading how Matt is basically just curled up in a fetal position doing nothing else, I wonder what the aim of the dagger here is. I don't remember the specifics regarding the myth of what happens to someone who takes something out of Shadar Logoth. I think it was that they get possessed or their soul slowly disintegrates, kind of a sentiment. I think it was more in the direction of they're possessed by Mordeth. What exactly can Matt do as he is? He doesn't quite seem capable of going out there and doing evil things for personal gain. So if he's just kind of slowly deteriorating to a point of just being non-functional, it's scary. I feel for Rand and Matt. Master Gil shows up and mentions to Rand, "There's someone been asking after you in the city." And Rand feels a surge of hope. "Asking after you and those friends of yours, by name. You younglings, anyway. Seems to want you 3 lads most." Similar to Rand, who feels anxiety replaced hope. At first, I was hopeful. I was like, oh, did they arrive? Is this it? And then I think, wait, no. It's probably nothing good, or no one good. Rand asks who, and Gil says, "Don't know his name, just heard about him." So it's a him. "I hear most things in Camelin eventually. Beggar. Half mad, I hear. Even so, he could take the Queen's bounty at the palace, even with things as hard as they are. On high days, the Queen gives it out with her own hands, and there's never anyone turned away for any reason. No one needs to beg in Camelin. Even a man under warrant can't be arrested while he's taking the Queen's bounty." 2 ideas there. He's a half-mad beggar. There are essentially 3 possibilities that I keep coming back to. 3.5, and I think the half is unlikely, therefore only half a point. My first thought was Padden Fane, and it would probably be quite devastating for Rand to see Padden Fane, realize he's a dark friend, and then realize that it was his fault what happened oh so long ago. That would be quite a thing for him to have to deal with. My next thought was maybe it's Tom turned dark friend, but I don't think that's entirely likely. I feel like evil Tom would more or less know and or remember to go to the Queen's bounty. And my third thought was Tam. Maybe it's Tam. Tam is disguised because he knows the names. It could still be. There's an interaction later on with the beggar and Rand gets pretty frightened, so I don't think it's him. I think of those 3, Padden Fane is the most likely. The 4th would be, is it Lan, and the party is just staying outside of the city for safety for the time being. But as I remember, yeah, he sees the beggar later on and it's not Lan. The other part of this comment, though, is about going and taking the Queen's blessing. I guess I'm still trying to figure out what the Queen's blessing is. It kind of seems like some sort of absolution or confession of some kind. That's the sense that I get from this segment. I'm sure we'll get more specifics about it later on, though. Rand says, "A dark friend? If the dark friends know our names," he thinks. I'm trying to remember if they do or don't know the names. I kind of feel like how could they not? Least of all if Padden Fane is in fact a dark friend. Not that Padden Fane is anywhere close to these dark friends, but The Dark One certainly must know the names, if that's the case. Anyway, just a thought. Gil chastises Rand for having dark friends on the brain. He says the rumors are overblown, just because the White Cloaks are whipping up everyone into a frenzy and having people see strange shapes doesn't mean that they need to be paranoid or worried. And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, you have no idea. I mean, you probably have some idea, but it's rough knowing where Rand has been and what he has dealt with. It's clear that Rand is going out, and Gil has the great line, "Going out, are you? Well, I can't say I care for it myself, even today, but there's hardly anybody left here but me. Not your friend? Matt's not feeling very well. Maybe later. Well, be that as it may, you watch yourself now. Even today, good Queen's men will be outnumbered out there. Light burn the day I ever thought to see it so. Best you leave by the alleyway." So we really do get the sense that today's a big day, even if it's not explicitly stated to be Logain Day. I think my first read through, I misinterpreted the "I can't say I care for it myself" line as being you shouldn't be going out, Rand, while people are after you, while you are supposedly in danger. And I'm having that thought myself at Rand. He shouldn't go out, especially with this new revelation that there's someone out there who has his name and trying to find him. But going through it now, I realize, no, it's just about not going out on such an important, busy day. In my first read through, I'm thinking, oh, he's going to that healer person that he was just thinking about. At least that's what I thought at the time. I thought he was going to try and go get some help for Matt. And then I had imagined the rest of this chapter kind of going the way of him finding out that he's cursed. And naturally, it does not end up going that way. Apparently, there are two blood-bedamned traitors sitting across the street watching the front door of the Queen's Blessing. We learn a little bit later on about these two factions in the city, the pro-Morghese and the anti-Aes Sedai. Rand is making his way out, and one of the inn's guards, Lamgwin, says, "Watch your back today, man. When the trouble starts, you'll be a handy one to have here, not somewhere with a knife in your back." So he's expecting trouble. And it's at this point I'm starting to think Logain Day, but the thought of trouble rather than a triumph had me considering it might not be. That there's something else going on that we just haven't been told about. Rand goes out, and he notices the two men who are watching the inn, and we get the passage. They made no secret of their allegiance. Not only were their swords wrapped in white tied with red, they wore white armbands and white cockades on their hats. He had not been in Camelin long before learning that red wrappings on a sword, or a red armband or cockade, meant support for Queen Morghese. White said the Queen and her involvement with Aes Sedai and Tar Valon were to blame for everything that had gone wrong, for the weather and the failed crops, maybe even for the false dragon. And before I even read a sentence further, I had to go back to double check what the cloth and string combination was that Rand had picked out previously. So it looks like he picked the minority faction, which is pro-Queen Morghese, and it recontextualizes the politeness that he exhibited when he was talking to the innkeeper there. One, given that the other faction is larger than the smaller faction, meaning the Queen isn't the most popular person in the world right now, it is more likely than not that that shopkeeper was anti-Aes Sedai. But there's humor on top of that, considering Rand basically saying, "I didn't come here to see Logain. Light illumine Queen Morghese." The situation's just funny to me. He thinks to himself he didn't want to be involved in Camelin politics, and he wishes that the colors he got had been reversed. Nevertheless, the red was the cheaper, and he had to do what he had to do at the time. And then it's stated, "Today, Camelin celebrated a victory of the light over the shadow. Today, the false dragon was being brought into the city to be displayed before the Queen before he was taken north to Tar Valon. No one wants to talk about how only the Aes Sedai are capable of dealing with a man who could wield the one power. All that matters is that it was men of Andor at the front lines who stopped him, and everything else can be forgotten." Rand is continuing through the city. The crowd ran singing and waving banners, laughing, but men displaying the red kept together in knots of 10 or 20, and there were no women or children with them. He thought there were at least 10 men showing white for every one proclaiming allegiance to the queen. The crowd was so thick that jostling was inevitable. Even white cloaks did not enjoy their little open spaces in the throng today. As Rand let the crowd carry him toward the inner city, he realized that not all animosities were being reined in. So on the surface level, everything's great and exciting, but the keen eye still catches on to the tension that still exists. The white cloaks, who normally experience awe and deference, are bustled by the crowd, and it's kind of alarming to them. That was an interesting passage. Rand thinks no one would have dared to do such a thing 2 days earlier. More, Rand realized the men who had done the bumping wore white cockades on their hats. It was widely believed the white cloaks supported those who opposed the queen and her Aes Sedai advisor, but that made no difference. Men were doing things of which they had never before thought. Jostling a white cloak today, tomorrow perhaps pulling down a queen. He's wishing there were more of his particular color set around at that moment. And then we get a song. Forward the lion, the white lion takes the field. Roar defiance at the shadow, forward the lion, forward and/or triumphant. Don't have too much to say on the song. The pathway that the false dragon will take is well known, and so people are crowding it, but it's kept clear by lines of soldiers and Queen's Guards. Rand is making his way toward a place where he'll be able to see both the queen and Logain. To see the false dragon and a queen both, that was something he had never dreamed of back home, is a neat line. He's around the inner city, and much of what the Ogier had made still remained. The roads here, as opposed to the rest of the city, follow curves of hills, as if they are natural parts of the earth. There are rises and dips, parks seen from different angles, even from above, where their walks and monuments made patterns pleasing to the eye, though barely touched with green. There are towers. All in all, it would have been something to see if not for the crowd that hurried him along before he had a chance to really take it in, and all those curving streets made it impossible to see very far ahead. He's swept around a bend, and he sees the palace, and he thinks that the beautiful building seems more sculpted by an artist than having just been built like an ordinary building. And he realizes he can't really get any closer. He's not too close, but he can't get closer. There are a lot of soldiers around. Rand is thinking the soldiers look like something out of a Gleeman's Tale, a guard of honor. Rand gives up on getting any closer to the palace. The crowd is immense, and he has found a place that he thinks is sufficient. It should be close enough that he can get a really good look at Logain's face. The crowd is rippling. No one seemed to hesitate in letting it go where it wanted, even if that meant losing a good spot for viewing, as the crowd flowed back in on itself behind the passing. Finally, directly across from Rand, the crowd bulged into the street, pushing aside red-cloaked pikemen, who struggled to shove them back and broke open. The stooped shape that shuffled hesitantly out into the open looked more like a pile of filthy rags than a man. Rand heard murmurs of disgust around him, and at that point I'm like, oh shit, it's the beggar. No! And then I'm expecting another Paddon Fane type situation. The ragged man paused on the far edge of the street. His cowl, torn and stiff with dirt, swung back and forth as if searching for something or listening. Abruptly, he gave a wordless cry and flung out a dirty claw of a hand, pointing straight at Rand. Immediately, he began to scuttle across the street like a bug. Yeah, at that point, I'm like, no, as much as I would have liked this to be Tam, it's not Tam. No, this very much sounds like a dark friend. The beggar! Whatever ill chance had led the man to find him like this, Rand was suddenly sure that, dark friend or not, he did not want to meet him face to face. He could feel the beggar's eyes like greasy water on his skin. Especially, he did not want the man close to him here, surrounded by people balanced on the brink of violence. The same voices that had laughed before now cursed him as he pushed his way back away from the street. So Rand starts running, but there are a couple of things to mention regarding this passage. One being, I almost expected him to point and shout out, "Dark friend!" Not that I'm sure that would have done much use. Might have brought more trouble down on himself than anyone else. And the line, whatever ill chance had led the man to find him like this, considering the emphasis in the last couple of chapters about how the Dark One is perhaps having more of an influence on the world than he had to, I think to myself, this is no ill chance. None whatsoever. This feels very much orchestrated by the Dark One. So Rand runs. He stumbles, he pushes through the crowd. At one point he gets lost. He did not know where he was except that he was still within the inner city. He takes a moment, and then, poised to run again, he looked back the way he had come. Only one person moved on the street, a woman walking placidly along with her shopping basket. There's another woman in this chapter. Interesting. Is this the woman? But we'll get to that. Almost everyone in the city was gathered for a glimpse of the false dragon. He can't have followed me. I must have left him behind. And just as I'm about to chastise Rand, the prose goes on. The beggar would not give up. He was sure of it, though he could not say why. That ragged shape would be working its way through the crowds at that very minute, searching, and if Rand returned to see Logain, he ran the risk of a meeting. Yeah, good, Rand, so far. You should go back to the inn where you're safe. You should make sure you're not being followed by strange beggars and women, and you should make your way back to the inn. And sure enough, for a moment he considered going back to the Queen's blessing, but he was sure he would never get another chance to see a queen, and he hoped he would never have another to see a false dragon. There seemed to be something cowardly in letting a bent beggar, even a dark friend, chase him into hiding. And I think, no, bad, stupid Rand. But then I wrote a note to myself. I wrote, choice and the wheel. So I guess I was really considering the wheel and Ta'veren and one's ability to make small choices versus large choices. And I wonder, does free will exist in this universe? Is Rand actually making this choice? Or is this choice being made for him? Very concerning. I don't know that I have anything uniquely deep to say on the topic of free will, other than that I feel like conversations around it tend to just go in circles and then end up with, well, we don't know and there's not much we can do about it if we did. Nevertheless, I imagine it is a topic that will probably be explored in this book as we learn more about the Wheel and Ta'veren, but we'll see. Rand looks around. I guess this part of the city is more or less empty because everyone else is elsewhere, hoping to see Logain. So Rand takes off, hoping to find a place where he can get a good vantage point from which to see Logain. He's walking around the empty streets. He has not found anything yet until his eyes fell on the slope, bare of buildings, rising above the street where he was walking. In a normal spring, the slope would be an expanse of flowers and grass, but now it was brown all the way to the high wall along its crest, a wall over which the tops of trees were visible. This part of the street had not been designed for any grand view, but just ahead over the rooftops he could see some of the palace spires, topped by white lion banners fluttering in the wind. He was not sure exactly where the curve of the street ran after it rounded the hill beyond his sight, but he suddenly had a thought about that hilltop wall. So Rand basically starts climbing this mound or this hill up to the hilltop wall. The face of the wall had been left much in the natural state of the stone. The huge blocks fitted together so well that the joints were nearly invisible, the roughness making it seem almost a natural cliff. Rand grinned. The cliffs just beyond the sand hills were higher, and even Perrin had climbed those. His hands sought rocky knobs, his booted feet found ridges. The drums raced him as he climbed. He refused to let them win. He would reach the top before they reached the palace. In his haste, the stone tore his hands and scraped his knees, through his breeches, but he flung his arms over the top and heaved himself up with a sense of victory. That strikes me as an extremely important moment there, particularly the scraping of his hands and knees. So put a big asterisk here, and I believe there's another moment regarding that comes in later, so let's keep this in mind for the near future. Hastily, he twisted himself around to a seat on the flat, narrow top of the wall. He looked across tiled rooftops, but from the wall his line of sight was clear. He leaned out just a little and could see the palace gate and the Queen's guards drawn up there and the expectant crowd, expectant, their shouts drowned out by the thunder of drums and trumpets, but waiting still, he grinned. I won. It's a neat moment. I imagine it's a nice image. The procession makes its way through the city with a fanfare. The last of the foot soldiers rounded the curve, and behind them was a massive wagon. 16 horses pulled it in hitches of 4. In the center of its flat bed was a large cage of iron bars, and on each corner of the wagon bed sat 2 women, watching the cage as intently as if the procession and the crowd did not exist. Aes Sedai, he was certain. I had a brief flash of wondering if Rand would try to contact either of these women, but not a real supposition. Between the wagon and the footmen, and to either side rode a dozen warders, their cloaks swirling and tangling the eye. If the Aes Sedai ignored the crowd, the warders scanned it as if there were no other guards but they. With all of that, it was the man in the cage who caught and held Rand's eyes. And throughout this entire segment, I am expecting Logain to look directly at Rand. I am expecting some sort of communication between the two. Yes, I know they aren't hyper close to each other, but I expected, a magical connection of some sort. Maybe Logain is going to end up teaching Rand how to use the power. That's a thought. He was not close enough to see Logain's face as he had wanted to, but suddenly he thought he was as close as he cared for. The false dragon was a tall man with long dark hair curling around his broad shoulders. He held himself upright against the sway of the wagon, with one hand on the bars over his head. His clothes seemed ordinary, a cloak and coat and breeches that would not have caused comment in any farming village. But the way he wore them, the way he held himself, Logain was a king in every inch of him. The cage might as well have not been there. He held himself erect, head high, and looked over the crowd as if they had come to do him honor, and wherever his gaze swept, there the people fell silent, staring back in awe. So I'm going to break up this chunk quickly to say it occurs to me I never really thought too deeply on what Logain might look like. We had bits of wonder, I guess you could say, at what kind of man Logain was, and we have a loose idea of what a male touching the power does to a person. I don't think I expected him to be like a Matt, if that makes sense. I didn't expect some corrupt, pitiful thing. In hindsight, I guess it makes sense then that he would therefore have the bearing of a king. I'm not disappointed at all. He seems very intimidating and dangerous and charismatic. He held himself erect, head high, and looked over the crowd as if they had come to do him honor, and wherever his gaze swept, there the people fell silent, staring back in awe. When Logain's eyes left them, they screamed with redoubled fury as if to make up for their silence, but it made no difference in the way the man stood, or in the silence that passed along with them. As the wagon rolled through the palace gates, he turned to look back at the assembled masses. Surprised, he turned to look back. I wonder if that reduces his dignity a bit, perhaps. They howled at him beyond words, a wave of sheer animal hate and fear, and Logain threw back his head and laughed as the palace swallowed him. That seems ominous. And then other contingents follow, and they're all much less impressive than that start and Logain were. Rand thinks of Logain. He was defeated, wasn't he? Light, he wouldn't be in a bloody cage if he wasn't defeated. Overbalanced, he slipped and grabbed at the top of the wall, pulled himself back to a somewhat safer seat. With Logain gone, he became aware of the burning in his hands where the stone had scraped his palms and fingers. Yet he could not shake free of the images, the cage and the Aes Sedai. Logain, undefeated. No matter the cage, that had not been a defeated man. He shivered and rubbed his stinging hands on his thighs. Okay, so on the Logain of it, I'm glad he has this perception of Logain as not defeated. It signals to me that he is still very dangerous. It does have me wondering if those particular Aes Sedai might be under his sway, and this is some sort of plot to kill Queen Morghese or something. I don't think that's particularly likely. But more importantly here, we have the aching hands. So earlier on, we had him scraping his knees and his hands in an act of climbing higher, in an act of climbing a wall, seeking victory. Because shortly after that, he has that thought, I won. And you've got the lion in the background, the lion imagery. And it's not until after this that he realizes, oh, his hands are bleeding. So what does that mean? What does it mean that he is harming himself through this, in this act of climbing, this act of seeing the dragon reborn? It strikes me as ominous. I wonder if there's foreshadowing here. Burning hands, perhaps signaling that what he is going to have to do, what he is going to have to become, it's going to be difficult. Perhaps there's something here on the topic of building, of being a builder. Perhaps it is signaling the danger of using the one power in conjunction with Loghain's procession. I don't know. I don't feel as if this kind of thinking is something that I am uniquely talented in. This is something I tend to prefer people just tell me their interpretation of. And in no small part did I start this entire channel because this is a talent that I want to improve at. And I guess I've now listed some of the areas in which I wonder on this topic. So having given those, do please comment and tell me what you make of whatever symbolism or foreshadowing there is to be found here in the act of him scraping his knees and hands as he climbs the wall to see Loghain. I would tremendously appreciate it. But then it's not over yet. Rand wonders to himself aloud, why were the Aes Sedai watching him? And then there's a response. They're keeping him from touching the true source, silly. He jerked to look up toward the girl's voice, and suddenly his precarious seat was gone. He had only time to realize that he was toppling backward, falling, when something struck his head and a laughing Loghain chased him into spinning darkness. Ooh, what a cliffhanger. Or a wall faller. What a wall faller. Now, having gone through this chapter a second time, I wonder if it was that mysterious woman he saw. My immediate fear is that this is a dark friend. We know women can be dark friends too. Equal opportunity evil. But then I also wonder if it's Min. My very first run through, I thought that the girl had smashed him over the head. On further thought, and particularly this second read through, it seems like he just kind of tripped, which is embarrassing. I fear for Rand right now, I really do. So I'm going to go read the next chapter. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks, bye.